Recently, it was the anniversary of the consecration of Westminster Abbey in London, an architectural masterpiece of the 13th to 16th centuries. Westminster Abbey also presents a unique cavalcade of British history. There has been a church on the site since the late 8th century, when a small community of monks formed a monastery there. It's possible the site dates back as far as the early 7th century, to a time of the first Christian king of the Saxons, Sabert. Around the year 1040, King Edward, later St. Edward the Confessor, established his royal palace by the banks of the River Thames on the land known as Thorney Island. Close by was a small Benedictine monastery founded under the patronage of King Edgar and St. Dunstan around 960 of the Common Era. This monastery Edward chose to re-endow and greatly enlarge, building a large stone church in honor of St. Peter the Apostle. The church became known as Westminster, to distinguish it from St. Paul's Cathedral, which was the Eastminster. By the time the church was consecrated 25 years later, Edward was too ill to attend, and he died shortly after the consecration. He was buried in front of the high altar. Edward's Abbey survived for only 200 years, until the middle of the 13th century, when King Henry III decided to rebuild it in the new Gothic style of architecture. It was the great age for cathedrals. In France, there was the construction of Amiens, Évreux, and Chartres, and in England there was Canterbury, Winchester, and Salisbury, to mention a few. Under the decree of the King of England, Westminster Abbey was designed to be not only a great monastery and a place of worship, but also a place for the coronation and burial of monarchs. Every monarch since William the Conqueror has been crowned in the Abbey, with the exception of Edward V and Edward VIII, who were never crowned. The ancient coronation chair can still be seen in the church. The Abbey has hosted 16 royal weddings and houses the remains of 17 monarchs, such as Henry V and Catherine of Valois, Anne of Cleves, the wife of King Henry VIII, Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth I, and James I. The Abbey is also the final resting place of many notable writers, poets, scientists, and politicians. Here you will find the tombs of Neville Chamberlain, Charles Darwin, Sir Isaac Newton, Robert Browning, Charles Dickens, George Frederick Handel, William Shakespeare, Jane Austen, Muzio Clementi, and Henry Purcell, to name but a few. When visiting the Abbey, make sure to take time to see the glorious Lady Chapel, built by King Henry VII, first of the Tudor monarchs. This side chapel has a spectacular fan-vaulted ceiling and the craftsmanship by Italian sculptor Pietro Torrigiano. The chapel was consecrated on February 19th in the year 1516. Poets' Corner is a place of pilgrimage for those who love literature. More than 100 poets and writers are buried or have memorials here. The first poet to be buried in 1400 was Geoffrey Chaucer, author of the Canterbury Tales. Not because he was a poet, but because he was clerk of the king's works. Nearly 200 years later, Edmund Spenser, who wrote The Faerie Queen for Elizabeth I, one of the longest poems in the English language, asked to be buried near Chaucer, perhaps with an eye on his own literary reputation. Today, the Abbey is still a church dedicated to regular worship and to the celebration of great events in the life of a nation. Neither a cathedral nor a parish church, Westminster Abbey, or the Collegiate Church of St. Peter, Westminster, to give it its correct title, is a royal peculiar, under the jurisdiction of a dean and chapter, subject only to the sovereign and not to any archbishop or bishop. It was Winston Churchill who said, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." In 1965, the Abbey celebrated the 900th anniversary of the consecration of King Edward's Abbey, taking as its theme One People. Such a theme seemed to be fitting for a church which, through a long history of involvement with the developing life of the British people, has become known throughout the world. 56 years after that anniversary, may Westminster Abbey continue to be a place of invitation and welcome, where people from all walks of life, of various traditions and cultures, of faiths and beliefs, may be reminded that we are all indeed one people.